In the heart of a live broadcast on one of America's most popular talk shows, Brad Pitt, the iconic Hollywood star, finds himself ambushed by the host with a series of deeply personal and controversial questions. Initially calm, Brad's demeanor shifts as the questions become increasingly invasive. Attention builds to a breaking point when he delivers a scathing, unexpected response that leaves the host speechless and the audience in disbelief. The moment quickly goes viral, sparking debates on social media about privacy, the ethical line between celebrity and public life, and the power dynamics in media interviews. This story dives deep into the complexities of fame, personal boundaries, and the raw emotions that come to the surface when pushed too far. The stage was set, the lights dimmed, and the studio audience buzzed with excitement. Brad Pitt, looking effortlessly handsome as always, sat in the plush chair opposite the talk show host. The host, known for his sharp wit and no-holds-barred questions, had a reputation for making even the most composed celebrities squirm. Today, however, it was Brad's turn. As the cameras rolled and the applause faded, the host began with a casual question about his latest film. But everyone in the room knew this was just the beginning. Brad smiled, his eyes gleaming, but beneath the surface, he was already on edge. He had been in the spotlight for decades, but today felt different. The host was too eager, too insistent on digging deeper into Brad's personal life. "Tell us, Brad," the host began, leaning forward with a mischievous grin. "What's it really like to be the most famous man in the world? Does it ever get overwhelming? Or do you thrive on the attention?" Brad's calm expression remained, but there was an unmistakable tension in his jaw. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. The conversation began innocently enough, but it didn't take long for the host to shift gears. Without warning, he dropped a bombshell. "So, Brad," the host continued, "you've been through a lot: marriages, public breakups, controversies. Is there any part of your personal life that you regret sharing with the world?" The audience was silent, sensing that the questions were becoming more pointed. Brad's gaze shifted, and for a brief moment, the mask of the Hollywood star slipped. "Regret?" Brad repeated, his voice cool but firm. "Maybe I regret that people think they have a right to know everything about me. I never asked to be a poster child for public scrutiny." The host smirked, pressing further. "But isn't it part of the job, Brad? You chose this life, didn't you?" Brad's face hardened, but he held his composure. "I chose to act. I didn't choose to be dissected." The host was relentless now. The questions became increasingly personal, and the air in the studio grew thick with tension. The audience watched in stunned silence as Brad's patience wore thin. The host, sensing an opportunity for ratings gold, threw a final question, one that he knew would strike a nerve. "Brad, do you think you're misunderstood? Or is this just the Brad Pitt persona you've cultivated over the years?" In that moment, something snapped inside Brad. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The audience gasped, and the host froze, a look of shock on his face. "Misunderstood?" Brad's voice was low, but it carried across the studio like a thunderclap. "You want to know who I really am? Let me tell you. I'm a person, not a brand. Not a circus act for you to exploit for laughs and ratings." The host stammered, caught off guard by the raw anger in Brad's words. But Brad wasn't finished. "You're right," Brad continued, his voice gaining strength. "I've lived in the public eye, but that doesn't give anyone the right to cross the line. You want to tear me down? You're not going to get the satisfaction." The studio was silent. As Brad's words hung in the air, the tension was palpable. The audience, still in shock, could barely process what had just happened. The host, visibly rattled, stumbled over his next words, but it was clear the damage had been done. The clip would be replayed over and over on social media, igniting debates about celebrity privacy, the media's role in the lives of stars, and whether the line between entertainment and exploitation had been crossed. Brad walked off the set, leaving the host standing there, dumbfounded. The cameras continued rolling, but the energy in the studio had shifted. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was a moment that would define Brad's relationship with the media for years to come. Within hours, the footage from the talk show interview flooded social media. Clips of Brad's outburst were shared, reshared, and dissected across platforms. Fans, critics, and even casual viewers weighed in, creating a storm of opinions. Some supported Brad, praising him for standing up for his privacy, while others criticized his outburst as an overreaction. In Hollywood, the reaction was mixed. Some actors admired Brad's raw honesty, seeing it as a rare moment of vulnerability in an industry that often prided itself on carefully crafted images. Others, however, believed he had overstepped, turning a simple interview into a spectacle. Brad watched from his phone, scrolling through the endless comments and reactions. Despite his initial anger, a part of him felt vindicated. For years, he had felt like a puppet, constantly pulled by the strings of the media. Maybe this was his chance to take control of the narrative. The host, who had initially been blindsided by Brad's response, quickly became the center of criticism as well. He appeared on a follow-up episode of his show, attempting to explain himself to the audience. "I want to address the comments that have been made about my interview with Brad," the host said, looking directly into the camera. "Yes, the questions were tough, but that's what people expect. They want honesty, they want the truth, even if it's uncomfortable." The host paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I didn't expect the reaction I got from Brad, and I want to make it clear there was no intention to humiliate him. I respect him as an actor and a person." Behind the scenes, however, the host's PR team was working overtime, crafting a carefully worded apology and spinning the incident as a misunderstanding, something that Brad, in his own way, had forced to unfold. As the dust settled, Brad was approached by his publicist about the fallout. The media was relentless, and the story was only getting bigger. There were discussions of damage control, interviews, and appearances on other talk shows to address the controversy. But Brad wasn't interested in any of it. Sitting in his quiet, secluded home, he reflected on the interview. His anger still simmered, but there was something else now. Regret. Not about what he said, but about how it might have been misunderstood. Was he too harsh? Should he have found a way to navigate the questions without blowing up? He could have done damage control. He could have issued a statement, apologized, and moved on. But there was a part of him that couldn't bring himself to play that game anymore. The game of pretending, of being something he wasn't for the sake of a carefully constructed image. Later that evening, he picked up his phone and dialed the host's number. The conversation that followed would never be aired, but it was the most honest exchange Brad had had in years. "Listen," Brad started, his voice calm now. "I'm not going to apologize for what happened. But maybe maybe we could have handled it differently. You pushed me, and I pushed back. But I don't want this to define me, or you." The host was silent for a moment before responding. "I understand, and honestly, I'm not proud of how things went down either, but it is what it is now." Brad spent the next few days keeping a low profile, retreating from the media spotlight and focusing on his family. His children, his closest friends, and the people who truly mattered were the only ones who could offer him the clarity he needed. Despite the chaos, Brad found a sense of peace in the silence. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had taken control of his own narrative. The public might never fully understand his reasons for the outburst, but that was okay. In the end, it wasn't about the interview. It was about the moment he had reclaimed his voice, a voice that had long been muted by the demands of fame. Brad Pitt wasn't just a Hollywood icon anymore. He was a man who had learned to stand up for himself, even in the most unexpected of ways. As weeks passed, the story of the ambush interview slowly faded from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals and celebrity gossip. Yet for Brad, the consequences of that moment lingered. While some media outlets had apologized or softened their stance, others continued to spin the story into a narrative of Brad's fall from grace. However, the most profound effect of that day was not on his public image, but on his personal relationships. Brad's friends and family saw a man who had endured years of pressure and had finally snapped. They respected his decision to take a stand. Even if the world didn't always understand it. It also sparked a larger conversation about the ethical responsibility of the media and the balance between public interest and personal boundaries. The backlash against the host was swift, but it also made people question where the line should be drawn when it came to interviewing celebrities. Was it about the audience's entertainment or the person sitting in front of the camera? In the end, Brad didn't find redemption in the headlines. He found it in the quiet moments, the ones that no one could see. And that, he realized, was more than enough. Despite the months that passed, Brad's interview continued to dominate certain circles. Critics, journalists, and fans still debated the ethics of the show and whether Brad's reaction was justified. For every fan who cheered Brad's boldness, there were those who believed he had crossed a line. Some labeled him arrogant, others called him brave. Media outlets continued to discuss the interview, framing it in various ways. Some saw it as a moment of authenticity, a much-needed reminder that celebrities are human too, deserving of respect and privacy. Others used the moment to decry the culture of outrage, focusing more on the shock value than the deeper issues. Brad had raised. Brad, however, was learning to ignore the noise. His perspective had shifted. The more the media spun the story, the more he realized how little control he had over his public image. He began to see the whole affair as a reflection of the world he lived in, a world where every move, every word was scrutinized, twisted, and reduced to entertainment. In an unexpected turn, Brad withdrew from the public eye completely. After years of non-stop filming, red carpet events, and endless interviews, he simply disappeared. There were no cryptic social media posts, no interviews explaining his absence, just a quiet retreat. He took time to travel with his children, focusing on his family and reconnecting with what truly mattered. It was a kind of self-imposed exile, not as an escape, but as a chance to rediscover himself outside the confines of the Hollywood machine. His team, meanwhile, worked behind the scenes, carefully crafting a strategy for his return, if he chose to return. His publicist quietly pushed for a redemption arc, a documentary, an exclusive interview, perhaps a return to a beloved franchise. But Brad was in no rush. For the first time in his career, he was comfortable with letting the world forget about him. In silence, he found the freedom he hadn't realized he was missing. Months later, Brad quietly resurfaced, but it wasn't in the way anyone expected. Instead of a big comeback interview or a flashy film promotion, he chose a low-key project directing, a small indie film about a man struggling with fame. The film didn't have the glossy appeal of his previous blockbusters, nor did it have the same level of star power, but it resonated with audiences in a way that was much deeper. In the film, Brad played a version of himself, albeit a fictionalized one, who navigated the chaos of public life while trying to preserve his humanity. The project was raw, personal, and resonated with fans who had followed his journey for years. Critics praised Brad's performance, not just for his acting, but for the vulnerability he showed on screen. The film was subtle, introspective, and, most importantly, it gave Brad the chance to speak about fame on his own terms. Without saying much, he had told the world exactly what it needed to hear. It was a year after the ambush interview, when Brad finally agreed to a press conference. The media had been clamoring for answers, eager for him to address the elephant in the room. This time, however, Brad didn't come prepared with a statement. There was no apology, no scripted lines, only truth. He stood at the podium, calm and collected, as cameras flashed. "The truth is," Brad began, his voice steady, "I don't owe anyone an explanation. That night, I snapped. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I did. And I'm not sorry for it. I'm sorry for how it made some of you feel, but I am not sorry for standing up for myself." The press room fell silent as reporters shuffled in their seats, unsure of how to react. For Brad, this was his moment to reclaim his narrative. He wasn't the hero or the villain of the story. He was simply a man who had reached his breaking point, and that was enough. "I don't need to be perfect." "For you," Brad continued. "None of us do. The person you see in the movies isn't always the person I am in real life. I'm flawed, just like everyone else. And maybe that's the lesson here." The room was still. For the first time in months, the media had no soundbite. To chase as Brad's message slowly permeated the public consciousness, something surprising began to happen. There was a shift, not just in how Brad was perceived, but in the way the media treated celebrities in general. The interview incident had sparked a broader conversation about privacy, authenticity, and the toxic nature of celebrity culture. Other celebrities, inspired by Brad's honesty, began to speak out more openly about the pressures of fame, the manipulation of the media, and the cost of living under constant scrutiny. What had started as a single, controversial moment had now become the catalyst for a larger movement, one that sought to redefine what it meant to be a public figure in the modern world. Brad watched from the sidelines, not as the center of the conversation, but as someone who had sparked it. Years later, Brad Pitt's legacy was not solely defined by his iconic films or his status as a Hollywood legend. It was defined by a moment of raw emotion and outburst that, in the end, became a turning point for both him and the industry. In interviews, people no longer focused on the gossip surrounding his personal life. Instead, they spoke about the man who had challenged the status quo and stood up for his own dignity. His career continued, but it was on his terms. He chose his roles carefully, often working on smaller, more personal projects, the kind that allowed him to explore the complexities of life rather than perpetuate the fantasy. Brad Pitt had learned something valuable in the chaos of that fateful interview. The only real freedom is the freedom to be yourself, no matter what anyone else thinks. As the years rolled on, Brad Pitt's public appearances became less frequent, but each one was more meaningful. He no longer felt the need to justify himself or prove anything to anyone. When he did speak, it was always deliberate, and he spoke with purpose. He was no longer chasing fame or accolades. Instead, he embraced a quieter, more introspective life. In interviews, he would often reflect on the moment that had changed everything for him. He didn't see it as a mistake anymore, but as a turning point, a moment where he finally took ownership of his story. "I think it took that moment for me to realize that the most important thing isn't what others think of you, but what you think of yourself," Brad said in a rare interview years after the event. "It's funny, really. You spend your whole life trying to be liked, trying to fit into this image that others create for you. But in the end, it's about being true to who you are." While his public persona had changed, Brad's professional life was also evolving. He became deeply involved in producing films, often with themes of self-exploration and human complexity. His production company, which had been on the rise before the interview incident, flourished. The focus was no longer just on box office hits, but on creating films that tackled deep, universal themes. One of his most significant projects was a documentary that explored the realities of fame, mental health, and the pressure of being constantly in the public eye. The project, ironically, was a quiet success, praised for its honesty and the personal revelations it brought to light. Brad himself appeared in the documentary, not as the star, but as a subject, someone who had lived through the storm and now had something to share. The documentary's success was a reminder of Brad's unique ability to resonate with audiences. He had always been a symbol of Hollywood glamour, but now he was something more, someone who had transcended that image. As Brad's influence grew in the industry, so did the conversation around celebrity culture. His interview, once seen as a single dramatic moment, had become part of a larger narrative on the ethics of fame. The lines between personal life and public persona began to blur, and the concept of privacy became a hot topic in celebrity discussions. Brad became an advocate for mental health awareness, using his platform to speak out against the toxic pressures of fame. He worked with charities and organizations, often making anonymous donations and supporting causes without seeking attention. His focus shifted from personal gain to leaving a positive impact on the world. Hollywood's treatment of its stars began to change as well. Studios started to offer more control to actors and directors over their public images, allowing them more creative freedom and privacy. The press, too, began to take a step back, realizing that the audience wanted more from their stories, not just the drama, but the truth behind the facade. In the final years of his career, Brad Pitt found himself at peace with his place in the world. He never fully left Hollywood, but he had created a space for himself that allowed him to pursue projects that mattered to him. The blockbuster roles were behind him, but in their place were films with deeper meaning, roles that required him to tap into the very emotions he had kept hidden for so long. During a private event at a prestigious film festival, Brad was honored for his contributions to cinema and his advocacy for mental health. As he stood on the stage, accepting the award, he reflected on everything that had led him to this moment. "I never thought I'd be standing here like this," he said with a soft smile. "When I started this journey, I was just trying to be the best actor I could be. But along the way, I realized it wasn't about the fame. It was about the work, the stories, and the people you meet along the way. And if I've learned anything, it's that we all have a choice in how we respond to life's challenges. It's not about avoiding the storm. It's about learning how to dance in the rain." The audience erupted in applause, not just for the man who had become a Hollywood legend, but for the man who had found peace in the chaos of fame. Brad Pitt had finally come full circle. In the years that followed, Brad quietly stepped away from the spotlight. His final role was one of the most poignant of his career, a small, independent film about a man who learned to accept his flaws and embrace the passage of time. It was a role that spoke to the very heart of his own journey. As he walked away from the red carpets and the flashing cameras for the last time, Brad didn't feel the weight of regret or sadness. Instead, he felt relief. He had given everything he could to the industry that had given him so much. But now, he was ready to live for himself, without the constant pressure to be someone he wasn't. Brad Pitt's legacy would forever be defined by more than just his Hollywood stardom. It would be remembered for his authenticity, his willingness to stand up for himself, and his role in sparking a conversation about the true cost of fame. In the end, Brad had done more than survive the spotlight. He had changed it. After stepping away from the chaos of Hollywood's spotlight, Brad found solace in his personal life. With his children growing older, he had more time to spend with them, often taking them on trips to remote, peaceful locations. He became involved in small, local community projects, helping to rebuild a neglected theater in his hometown and offering mentorship to aspiring filmmakers. His fame, once a burden, had evolved into something he could now control. He no longer needed the validation that came with public adoration. It was enough to know that he had made a difference in the lives of the people he cared about. For the first time in decades, Brad felt grounded. While he kept a low profile, Brad began to quietly document his experiences behind the scenes. He wrote journals, capturing the reflections of a man who had spent a lifetime in the limelight, but never truly understood the cost of fame until he experienced it firsthand. These journals eventually turned into a collection of personal essays that would form the foundation of his final public work. His essays were raw, vulnerable, and deeply introspective, covering everything from the pressures of fame to the complexities of fatherhood. When they were eventually published, they became a surprising bestseller, further solidifying his place in history, not just as a Hollywood icon, but as a storyteller in his own right. In the midst of his quieter life, Brad was approached with an unexpected offer, a role that was unlike anything he had done before. It wasn't a big-budget action film or a blockbuster romance. It was an art house drama about a man nearing the end of his life, reflecting on his choices, his regrets, and the moments that defined his existence. The script resonated deeply with Brad. It was the kind of role that felt true to the person he had become. He agreed to do the film, not for the accolades, but because it felt like the natural next step in his evolution as an artist. Filming was slow, quiet, and deeply personal. The character he portrayed seemed to mirror his own journey in so many ways. Brad's return to the screen was met with surprise and admiration. The film, which was released in limited theaters, received critical acclaim. Critics were impressed not only by Brad's performance, but by the depth and maturity he had brought to his character. It wasn't about chasing awards or box office numbers. It was about creating something real, something that spoke to people. For the first time, Brad realized that true success wasn't measured by how many people watched his films, but by how deeply those films touched the people who saw them. Brad's return to acting marked a subtle yet significant change in the way Hollywood approached its stars. His absence had caused a ripple effect, one that slowly transformed the industry. The era of mindless celebrity worship began to fade, replaced by a more respectful acknowledgement of artists' individual journeys. Other actors, once obsessed with maintaining their public image, began to take a page out of Brad's book. There was less focus on perfection and more on authenticity. Hollywood, still a business, had learned that real stories, real emotions, and real people resonated more than the carefully constructed personas of old. Brad had become a quiet leader. In this shift, a catalyst for a deeper, more meaningful evolution of the industry, Brad's influence extended beyond the screen. In his later years, he became a sought-after mentor for younger actors and directors. He used his platform to advocate for change within the industry, particularly in the areas of mental health and diversity. His voice, once muted by the pressure of fame, was now one of the most respected in Hollywood. His mentorship didn't come with fanfare. Instead, he quietly guided the next generation, offering them not just advice, but insight into the true cost of fame. Many of the young stars who worked with him later credited Brad with helping them navigate the turbulent waters of celebrity without losing themselves in the process. Brad's personal life, too, underwent a transformation. Over time, he reconciled with many of the people he had once distanced himself from, including former colleagues, friends, and even family members. He had spent so much of his life chasing something external, whether it was success, recognition, or approval, that he had neglected the very relationships that mattered the most. Gradually, he built a quiet but fulfilling life, surrounded by people who loved him for who he was, not for who the world wanted him to be. The lessons he had learned were now part of his daily existence. Live with intention, stay true to yourself, and cherish the moments that matter. Brad never made a big announcement about his changing approach to life. There were no grand speeches or public declarations. Instead, his transformation was seen in the way he interacted with others. the types of projects he chose, and the way he spent his time. He had once been the center of the storm, but now he was content to be at its edge, watching the world spin without feeling the need to control it. He had become an advocate for personal revolution, the idea that anyone, regardless of their past or their fame, could reinvent themselves at any point in their life. In his final public address, Brad spoke about the journey he had undertaken, not just as an actor, but as a human being. He spoke of the dark moments, the times when he doubted himself, and the moments when the pressure seemed too great to bear. But through it all, he said, I learned that the heart of the journey isn't in the destinations we reach, or at titles we collect. It's in the moments in between, the quiet moments when we're truly ourselves, with no one watching. That's where the real magic happens. Brad's final years were peaceful. His last film, a labor of love and introspection, was released to great critical acclaim, but Brad never attended a premiere. He didn't seek applause or recognition. Instead, he watched the world from a distance, content with knowing that his work had touched people. In his final days, he lived out the rest of his life away from the public eye. Brad Pitt had long ago become a symbol not of Hollywood fame, but of personal authenticity. He was the man who had walked away from it all and came back, not for the applause, but to speak his truth. After Brad's passing, a quiet reverence settled over Hollywood. The stories told about him were no longer just about his blockbuster films or his roles as a leading man. They were about his quiet revolution, his advocacy for truth, and his willingness to be vulnerable in a world that demanded perfection. Brad Pitt had redefined what it meant to be a star. He had shown the world that fame wasn't everything, that there was more to life than red carpets and magazine covers. His true legacy was the quiet way he had lived, on his own terms. In the USA. Years after Brad's passing, the industry he had helped to shape continued to evolve. The changes he had influenced, particularly the shift toward mental health awareness and personal authenticity, became permanent fixtures in Hollywood's evolving culture. New generations of actors and filmmakers often looked to Brad as a guiding figure, not because of his fame, but because of the way he lived his life. His example inspired a new wave of stars who sought to balance their professional success with personal well-being. Brad's family continued his legacy of advocacy. His children, now adults, worked to support the causes their father had championed. They established a foundation in his name, focusing on mental health and artistic freedom. The foundation, much like Brad himself, became a quiet force for change, working in the background but making a profound impact. Brad's influence stretched far beyond Hollywood. The lessons he had imparted about fame, privacy, and mental health were echoed in countries around the world. Celebrities from different industries spoke out about the pressures of public life, and more began to prioritize their mental health and personal boundaries. The conversation Brad had started continued to grow, challenging the very fabric of celebrity culture. What had once been a quiet moment of rebellion had become a global movement. At a memorial service held in Brad's honor, stars from every corner of the entertainment industry gathered. They shared stories of Brad's quiet influence on their careers and their lives. His legacy was not in the awards or the records, but in the authenticity and honesty he brought to everything he did. The service was small, intimate, and deeply personal, just like Brad had wanted. Brad's final project was a film about his own life, an honest portrayal of the struggles, triumphs, and moments of vulnerability he had experienced. The film, which was released posthumously, was not about the glitz of Hollywood, but about the real man behind the image. It was a fitting tribute to a life lived on his own terms. As the years passed, Brad's story became a study in how fame could be used for something greater than self-promotion. His life was a testament to the idea that true fulfillment comes not from adoration, but from authenticity. Brad had spent his life seeking peace in a world that constantly pulled him in different directions. In the end, he had found it not in the accolades or the applause, but in the quiet moments of self-reflection, in the relationships he cherished, and in the work he left behind. Brad's final message to the world, given to his children, was simple, yet profound. Don't live for the world's approval. Live for what feels right to you. Be true to yourself, even when it's hard. Brad Pitt's journey had come full circle. From a young actor chasing fame to a seasoned star who had redefined what it meant to live authentically. His life had become a beacon of truth in a world that often sought to hide it. In his passing, Brad left behind more than just films. He left behind a legacy of self-awareness, courage, and the quiet strength to stand firm in one's own identity. And that was the story of Brad Pitt, the man who destroyed the illusion and created something real.